The Barricade Apocalypse Grille Guard is for those of you that have a 2007 to 2018 JK that are looking for something that is going to replace not only the grille but also the bumper on your Jeep, giving a very different look than factory and also adding a little bit of off-road functionality. I'm going to go 2 out of 3 wrenches for this installation because there's a little bit of disassembly, reassembly, there's some brackets, there's a lot of hardware here. It's a little bit of an involved install, but no drilling to do. Fairly straightforward, and I'm going to show you how to do it in just a second. So whatever you want to call it, a grumper, a grille guard, whatever it is, this is going to be one of those love it or hate it mods. Some people absolutely love the different look that this gives to the Jeep by changing not only the grille but also the bumper, while other people, usually people that are a little bit more on the purist side of things, say don't mess with my 7-slot grille, change your bumper if you want to. So depending on where you fall into, this is either going to be a mod that you want on your Jeep or you want nothing to do with. And that's okay, there are some of those really polarizing mods out there, this definitely being one of them. Now, if you're looking at this from a functional standpoint, it is going to add a good bit of functionality to your Jeep. You are going to have a bumper down here that has a winch mount built right into the top of it. It is pre-drilled for it. You can see right here, this is where your fair lead is going to go. So your winch cable is going to come out of that. And from that standpoint, I do like the fact that the winch is sort of hidden behind everything. I always like a bumper that sinks that winch down a little bit so you don't see a whole lot of it. And this, you're not gonna see any of it. You're just gonna see that hook sticking out, which is something that I do like. Down here, you're gonna have a couple of D-ring mounts bolted right on the front of the bumper there. So for any sort of recovery where you need a snatch strap or you're going to a snatch block and back to the bumper, you're going to have those D-rings. So really any recovery situation, assuming you're adding a winch on here, you are going to be able to handle with this setup. Now this is going to have these nice big cutouts here, and part of that is style, but part of that's so that you can get in there and operate your winch. You can plug in your remote control, you can switch from free spool to that connected mode on your clutch so that you can actually spool in powered. So these are going to give you access to that area. As you can see, you have your turn signals behind these pieces of honeycomb mesh on either side here. Your headlights are fairly unobstructed actually, which is a good thing from a functional standpoint, but that's all the function. What a lot of you are going to be buying this for is not the function, but more the look. This is going to completely delete that factory 7-slot grille. No Jeep logo on this thing. It's going to have that really angular bump out style that goes from the top of the hood all the way actually past the front of the bumper, giving that big bulge in the front. And it's just a completely different look than you get from a factory Jeep. Again, love it or hate it. Now, this is going to be a big hunk of steel. Because there is so much stuff here, this isn't going to be an inexpensive mod. This is going to come in at right around that $650 mark. Now, if you compare it to other grille guard grumper combinations out there on the market, this is going to be pretty fairly priced. But if you compare it to a bumper that's just going to give you a winch mount and a couple of D-ring mounts, it is going to be a lot more expensive than that. But again, most of you aren't buying it for the functionality, you're buying it for the look. So if you really love it and you have the budget, it is going to be a pretty easy bolt-on installation. So like I said, 2 out of 3 wrenches because there are quite a few pieces here. Let me show you how to get it installed. For this install, we used a couple of different sockets, a 18mm shallow and 18mm deep well socket, along with a 13 and a 10mm socket. We also used a 4mm Allen head socket and a small 3/8 extension. All of these were driven by a combination of a 3/8 electric impact and a 3/8 pneumatic impact. We also used an 18, 13, and 10mm wrench and a trim removal tool, along with the Allen key that's included in the kit. The first step in this installation is going to be removing the factory front bumper. Now, we don't have a splash guard or a frame cover on our bumper. The frame cover goes right in this area between the grille and the bumper. The splash guard, of course, on the bottom between the bumper and the crash bar. We've had these bumpers on and off a bunch of times, and ours are removed. But if yours are still in place, you'll need to use a trim removal tool to pull the plastic clips that hold both of those pieces in place, and then you can remove them from the Jeep. And once those are removed, there are going to be 8 bolts that you'll have to remove to actually get the bumper off. There are going to be 2 on either side of the frame rail on each side of the bumper. Now you can go ahead and remove those nuts from the bumper, but before you actually pull it off, make sure you unplug your factory fog lights. That way you're not pulling on those wiring harnesses. So we'll get under the Jeep and get all that hardware removed and get our lights unplugged. With everything unbolted and unplugged, we can remove the factory bumper from the Jeep by just grabbing it and giving it a pull. With the bumper removed, we can remove the factory grille. Now, the grille is going to have a bunch of plastic clips along the top here that we'll get to after we pop the hood open. On the bottom, there are just a couple of pressure clips, so again, a good pull is going to remove it from the Jeep. But before we do any of that, we are going to want to unplug our turn signals to make sure that, again, when we're removing it, we're not pulling any of those harnesses tight. So for this, you can really just reach back there and you'll find your harness, give it a little bit of a pinch and a pull, and it'll come right off. So we'll do the same thing on the other side, then get the hood popped and get to those plastic clips. So with these clips, you can just use a trim removal tool to get under there and pry the center part up. Once that's up, you can get underneath that lower part to remove the whole clip from the Jeep. With all 6 of the plastic clips along the top of the grille removed and the turn signals unplugged, we can just give the grille a grab and pull to remove it from the vehicle. Now that the grille is removed, we have to do one more thing with it, and that's remove these turn signal housings. So there are just a couple of plastic tabs that you have to push on the back side here. Once those are pushed in, you can push the turn signal out through the front side. As you can see, that whole housing comes right out, and now we can set the grille aside. Now we can start installing the new bumper, and before we can do that, there's just a little bit of assembly that needs to get done on a couple of brackets. So as you can see here, I have one of my turn signal brackets. These are 2-piece brackets, so we're going to go ahead and bolt the 2 halves together here with our small bolts, a couple of washers, and some nuts. Get the washer over top of the bolt head there. Washer and nut on the other side. We have one more of the same setup. Into the other side. And these are all going to be slotted bolt holes, which leaves the ability to adjust everything so everything's going to line up properly. So while we want these to be tight enough that nothing's going to fall apart, we do want to leave them a little bit loose. I'm just going to grab my 10mm wrench here, and I have a 4mm Allen head socket in my impact here, and I'm just going to give them a little bit of a twist, but again, I am going to leave them a little bit loose. Now that the bracket is assembled, we can bolt our turn signal into the bracket. So as you can see in our bracket, we have a couple of holes where the tabs on the back of our turn signal are going to go. So they'll slide right in there. And then we're going to use a couple of the included bolts that come in the kit here to just cinch down the turn signal and make sure it's not going to move around on us. So you don't want to over tighten these because you can crack your turn signal housing. So we're going to make them finger tight and then go back and just add another, maybe a quarter or half a turn on each of them just to hold them nice and tight. So that's how you assemble the turn signal bracket with your factory turn signal. We're going to do that one more time for the other side, and then we can get to installing parts onto the Jeep. With those brackets assembled, it's time to install them onto the center section of our bumper. So this is obviously not where this is going to live. I just have it set up here as a working space. Your turn signal brackets are going to be marked on the back side. This one has a P, so that lets us know that this is our passenger side bracket. And there are a couple of oblong holes right in our center section that's going to bolt to. So it's going to sit right about there. Again, we have those bolts loose so we can make some adjustments at a later time, but for now, that's pretty much how it's going to sit. So grab some hardware and get it bolted down. We have a bolt with a washer down through the top, and then another washer and a nut up through the bottom to get the brackets bolted onto the center section of the bumper here. Like with everything else, we'll loosely tighten it down and then move on to the other side. Now we'll grab the center section of our bumper, set it down over the frame rails, and get it bolted in place. To get the bumper bolted in place, we put our D-ring mount right over top of the front of the bumper. We have a couple of larger bolts with washers on them, and you're going to go right through the D-ring mount, through the bumper, and right through the frame horn of the Jeep, where that factory bumper bolted into place, just like that. And on the back side, go with a flat washer, then a lock washer. We'll repeat the same thing. You have 4 bolts per side for a total of 8. Once all of the bolts are installed, you can tighten them down. The next step in the installation is going to actually be holding that grille guard up onto the Jeep and getting your lights sitting exactly where you want them. Now, the nice thing about this grille guard is that the lights shine through basically a piece of mesh, so they don't have to be perfectly centered in a round hole. If they weren't perfectly centered and the hole was round, it would be very obvious. You'd really want to get these dialed in, but because they're not sitting in a round hole, you have a little bit more play there. But again, what you can do is hold your grille guard up, make sure the lights are sitting how you want them, and then get them tightened down, because it is going to be a little bit tough to get to this hardware once the grille guard is installed. So we're going to go ahead and do that, and then we're also going to plug our turn signals in preparation to do the final installation of the grille guard. The other thing that you'll want to do at home if you are installing a winch on your Jeep is to get that winch bolted up here as well, because again, you're not going to be able to have access to that area once the grille guard's installed. At this point, we're ready to get our grille guard set up on our bumper and get it bolted down. With the grille guard set up on top of the bumper, we can get it bolted down. So there are 3 bolts that go across the bottom and go right from the grille guard into the bumper. We'll get those ones started first. A bolt and washer through the top side. It's just a matter of needing to hold both sides. So this is kind of how I have to do it. And we can install the other 2 bolts before tightening everything down. We're gonna leave those bolts loose until we get the rest of the brackets installed. Before we tighten down those lower bolts, we're going to install these upper brackets, and they require us to remove these 2 factory bolts, which we'll do with a 13mm socket. The bolts removed, we can put the bracket in place and drive the bolts back in. Now with the hardware included in the kit, we'll get the grille guard bolted onto the bracket. As with everything else, we're going to leave these a little bit loose until we get the rest of them installed. For now, we'll jump over to the driver's side and install the same bracket. The last bracket that needs to be installed in the top of the grille here is going to be for this bolt hole right here. In order to get that one installed, we have this small bolt plate that we're going to slide into this hole in the radiator support. Then very carefully, we're going to slide the bracket that comes in the kit over top of that. And we can install a washer and a nut. The whole time you have to be careful to hold on to that bolt plate, otherwise it'll fall down inside of the radiator support. And then we can take one last bolt setup and bolt it through the bracket we just installed. With everything installed loosely, we can make sure that the brush guard is sitting centered and then tighten everything down. The last pieces of hardware to tighten down are the 3 bolts that hold the grille guard onto the bumper. Now we'll put the hood down and make sure there aren't any clearance issues between it and our new grille guard. Last thing to do is put on the D-rings and we're done. So that's going to do it for our installation. If you're looking for something that's going to drastically change up the look of the front of your Jeep and also add a little bit of off-road functionality, I would recommend this option from Barricade, and you can find it right here at ExtremeTerrain.com.